Hello, everyone. Welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host, Liam, aka Himbar, and today I'm going through another um, presentation of mine, actually, that is not really new. This is from last year. But I wanted to do this actually as it is something that is, um, well, pertinent to other stuff I've had on my channel. But I wanted to go over a little bit of the Middle English and Havelok the Dane, as Havelok the Dane is an early example of a romance written in Middle English. We'll talk about that a little bit, but I just wanted to put it out here right at the beginning that essentially I want this out there that if you are interested in reading this romance after I go through this, and this is a very short presentation, um, that I will read it with you. If I don't want to set up like a read along, because I feel like when I tend to do those, like no one joins, right? And so if anyone wants to read this, I will read it with you. It's not a very long one. It's about 3,000 lines, and that's not a lot, right? So Beowulf, it's a little shorter than Beowulf, for example. And no, I'm not sure on the word count difference there, but Beowulf is more than this, a little over 3,000 lines as well. So. Um, And so, if you're interested in reading this, of getting an exposure to Middle English, then I will talk to me and I will read this with you. As it's always nice for me to go through and practice again reading Middle English stuff. But Middle English stuff is also relatively simple and easy compared to, say, like Old English or any other language that is either closely related to English, like Germanic languages, or not so closely related to English as it be like French or Latin or things much further afield. So let us talk about this real quick, though. So I gave this actually for the Fellowship of Mythmakers again last year. I can't remember what the occasion was, but I remember I made this last minute to give as like a backup lecture, and I did end up giving it. So, so anyways, our first sources for Havelok the Dane are in Geoffrey Guymar's Histoire des Inglés. This is Old French, so it'd be Histoire des Anglais or something like that. It'd be spelled differently slightly as well in modern French, but that's from about 1135 to 1140. This is actually the oldest Old French history. It's the oldest history written in French, and it's written about English history. And the first chunks, a good first chunk of that history is about Havelok the Dane, though actually the first two parts of the history are actually lost. So it would have had like a history of the Trojans, then the history of the Britons, and I guess the history of the England of the English, and that is the first part that survives. And so um, we have that, but essentially, again, that's written in Old French. And the second, well, another source we have, there is actually another, I think, called the Lay Havelok, but I'm not sure on much information of that. But the thing I mostly want to focus on is then the second oldest surviving English romance from either 1285 to 1310, the range in there. So considerably after Geoffrey Guymer would have been writing. But this is, again, romances would have been around for I've seen Wace's Brute considered the first romance. Then you often have like Chrétien de Troyes romances, which are I've seen some people describe them as novels. I really wouldn't describe them as novels. And sometimes if you read them in translation, they do read as novels. But if you read them in the original, they're written in verse. And I don't really think of novels as written in verse. So this is the second oldest after King Horn, which I actually have previously covered on this channel. And I'll hopefully remember to link my King Horn video if you're interested in that. Yes. So this is one of the romances that deals with the matter of England because it doesn't deal with the matter of Rome or the matter of France or the matter of Britain, which are much more popular in the medieval period. In fact, there's not very many works that we would say are considered as part of the matter of England, really at all. In particular, this deals with a place in England today still called Grimsby, which is Grimsbyr, which is Old Norse. You can tell it's Old Norse because Bir is one of the Old Norse settlement names in England. Actually, the Bir, interestingly enough, I'm sure it could be a fascinating study on Old Norse place names in different places. Because as far as I'm aware, for example, Bir, while a very common Old Norse place name in England, is not, say, in like Ireland. where the Old Norse settled. They didn't use the spear at all, ending, which is interesting. But anyways, very common, like Whitby, for example, is not the Anglo-Saxon name for Whitby. Would be like Stranishach or something like that. So anyways, Grimsby is a place in England still. It features heavily. This story features heavily in the founding. As if you read the romance, you'll figure that out, right? Grim is one of the main characters. So this is taken to be mythological for the town. The seal of the town once had the three characters from the lay on it, and I think there might have been something in the town as well. Once upon a time. I've never been to Grimsby though, so we also have this idea of reality and fiction going on. So it is based on Amlev Quaran's or Olafur Quaran, or Quaran, I guess, if you want to use a later pronunciation, a Norse Gael king of Dublin, Northumbria, who has quite an interesting history, but he is a historical person, or maybe an earlier version of Amleth. Amleth, as in like Hamlet or The Northman, the movie, if you've seen that. And I've also seen comparisons made by Carl Anderson to Harald or Sigurdsson's saga, so Harald Hardrada's saga. And I could see that. I mean, essentially it reads like a romance, right? It reads about someone losing their their birthright, and eventually gaining it back. That is the denouement, right? Is that this person gets their birthright back, like is proper and right and fitting in what we want from these medieval romances. So I do have pictured here from Kelmscott Press, which made rather beautiful editions of books. And this in particular, though, is actually not Havelok the Dane, but is William Morris's Child Christopher and Goldieland the Fair. Child Christopher being Havelok and Goldieland being Goldborough, though that gets rid of some of the magic, and it focuses more on the romance and less on the right of the king, which would make sense. William Morris is writing as a socialist thing, but William Morris is also writing heavily against industrialization. He's one of those romantic authors, I mean, among many other things that William Morris did, right? And also, Child Christopher and Goldieland the Fair is one of his prose romances, so it is not written in verse, it's written in prose. It is also noticeably shorter than Havelok the Dane, which is interesting because Havelok the Dane is not that long anyways, I would say. So one of his shorter prose romances as well. I've read about 6 of his prose romances at this point, and it's worth checking out for sure. As far as like early fantasy, it's I would say it's anachronistic to call William Morris's fantastical writings as fantasy, even in the sense it is actually, I would say, almost anachronistic to call Tolkien writing fantasy, because I don't really think that it's what he was aiming for. William Morris wrote prose romances, and what we would today call fantasy fiction, essentially. This is an example of the manuscript, actually. So you can see then the verses here. This would have a meter, and it does have a meter, and it has rhymes as well. And we'll look at the brief excerpts of the manuscript here in just a second, of the actual poem. So we have lines 98 through 105, for example. So let me read it for you real quick. Havade he non se gold breda, ne on his board non so gold shredda, that he ne wolde thorwit fedde, porre that on foot jede, for to haven of him the mede, that for us wolde on rode blede, Christ that our can wissa anrede, that ever woneth in any thede. Okay, so to me, this is really readable. As a modern English speaker, it is much easier than Old English. It has also, at least in this case, spelling conventions. I'm not sure exactly how. I've never really read this one in the manuscript. I don't know how readable it is, or how readily available it is online. But this looks very easy to me, and I hope it looks relatively easy to you as well. So here, so it is. This is my translation. So had he not so good board or meat, right? So bread, essentially, and not on his board. Sorry, that should be bread. I meant board down here. So not on his board, none so good shred, which is a morsel, that he would not feed the poor that went on feet. Went yed. Modern English went is like a kind of a combination of go and wend. And so you have went, but if which is an irregular verb anyways in Old English, because go and yed is an interesting thing going on there. But yed in modern English probably would be went. Actually, I went. I eat. Um, if it survived, maybe it does in dialect, but not in standard English. Um, until have of him the reward. A mead is reward. If you know Old English, that would make be recognizable at least. That for us on the cross bled, this would be rude, or road. Cross is from Latin. In English at the time, there's several words for the cross, and it's normally rod though, the rood. So if you know the Old English, dream of the rood, for example. Christ that all can guide and counsel or read. So read literally. This is actually related to the word read. Like I'm reading a book, right? And can is essentially can as well, but with there's a couple. These verbs are kind of both related in a sense of meaning to can. So yeah, it takes a little looking at. And then that ever dwelt in it, and woneth is dwelt, wunian, in any country. Theed is related to Theoden, actually, like a people ruler kind of. So, and then I wanted to look at this bit. Juan he this joy haveden market, sittan sticks broken and cracked, and the fur broth on brenna, ne was there spared gos ne hena, ne de hende ne de drake, net he didn't plan de make, and they wanted there no good meta, ween and alle didn't he feta, and him got mad glad and blida, weseo ledden he fella sitha. So I think, yeah, okay. So I didn't actually translate this. The reason I wanted to do this originally is so in the bottom here, but I'm not actually going to write it out in this case. But I left space to write out a translation. I just because again I don't think it's that difficult. So when this joy he had made, uh, since sticks broken and cracked, so sticks broken and cracked, and the fur broth burning. Bren has metathesis here. This R moves around a lot. It's a liquid, so it can move around pretty easily, and so this is burn. Um, nor was there spared goose nor hen, nor the hind, nor the duck. Meat or food he did plenty make, not wanting there no good meat. Wine, ale did he fat, I guess, and him or them made glad and blithe, so happy. Wassail, right? Led he with great Sith, I guess. And so him would be them, I think, in this case. Might be him. You have them as a later pronoun, them and there. And so it's a little confusing to read some of this other stuff. But I think you generally get the grasp of it. And then the fun, right? The end of it and the finale. Forty each would be second you, that having heard that you knew, that ilka of you was good a willa, say a pastor mosta stila, for him that haveth the ring market, and therefore fell nictus walked, that Jesu Christ his soul bringa before his Father at his ending. Amen. So again, I think a lot of these open by addressing like the audience, and then they end, and they might even open as well with like a prayer, kind of. And so this one is interesting. I would beseech you that have heard this rhyme now, that you pretty much, with God's wishing or want, desire, say Pater Noster quietly, so like still enough, right, quietly, for him that have the rhyme made, and therefore many nights stayed awake, that Jesus Christ his soul bring before his Father at his ending. And so that is the end of the poem. But again, if you're interested in the whole thing and then how this might relate to some other literature, if you're particularly interested in Norse literature, I think this is a good one. I mean, particularly it's Havelok the Dane. It is about a Danish figure, and particularly as there are still connections. Well, a lot of those connections are really heavily severed with the Norman conquest. You can still see, at least in northern or northeast of England, that there is still some of that here surviving in this romance. And so I think it has definitely plenty of interest, I think, for many readers. So anyways, thanks for Moon's Isom. Let me know. I'll catch you next time.